702.
Series Edition.
This series edition with me, Relebogile Mabotja, is brought to you by Momentum Insure, keeping you safe on your journey to success. And today, because severe weather is becoming more frequent and intense, and yet many South Africans still ignore official warnings, Momentum Insure is on a mission to change that. With safety at the heart of its brand, Momentum Insure is urging consumers to take weather alerts seriously, not only for their well-being, but to protect their pockets as well. So to help unpack the psychology behind why people sometimes ignore warnings and what we can do to change that, we're joined by Dr. Khosi Jiyane, Clinical Psychologist from Human Edge. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here again.
So let's kick off with just trying to understand around weather issues and how we as South Africans usually process the warnings.
I generally, jokingly kind of say, I've finally come to understand, I think, given the way in which, at least in my point of view, having observed over the years how weather patterns have changed. We used to know it's 4 seasons. We knew what happens when. Everything was sort of predictable, and we knew how to plan our functions, our ceremonies, our events around knowing what to expect around when. And I've said lately I've come to understand why they use the word weather, because it actually stands for we don't know whether it's going to be this or that anymore.
I never thought of it that way. I
Right.
like that, yes.
And the weather is taking us by storm all the time. It always changes. But as human beings, we like, on the one hand, predictability, because it enables us to plan. It enables us to run our lives, to schedule our things, and to know what's going to happen. And therefore, what we are seeing on the outside world, and I always make the distinction between the fact that we all live in one earth, and yet we all live in our worlds which are subjective. The earth is objective, whereas the world is subjective. It's the world we create for ourselves. And very often there is a mismatch and a misalignment between what we believe and what we would like, the weather to look like. And we then will proceed based on what we would like more than what the predicted reality is likely to be. Because there is a social world. We anticipate being in the presence and company of people and the warmth that comes with that, and how for many of us, because life is so busy, events like weddings and funerals have become more than just about the burial. It is places where we connect and reconnect with people that we don't know, people that we don't often see or talk about. And it is the common experience that, now this is where we meet. We hardly have the time to socialize otherwise. And therefore, these become more than just the events for themselves, for the purpose, the intended purpose. They are more a social space. And therefore, we are more likely, even though the weather looks a bit under the weather, we are more likely to be dismissive or to try to negotiate ourselves into going than not going, because there's so much more at stake socially than the actually intended event itself.
I'm wondering around just language. I think sometimes as South Africans, we are very exaggerated in how we describe certain things, Instead of saying, I'm having a tough day, we'll be like, I'm depressed, I'm so depro. And I'm wondering if when weather warnings come out, if we don't read them or adhere to them from a technical, scientific perspective, but we see them from the perspective of we are just dramatic as a people, as South Africans.
That is certainly a part of it. I think the other thing is that, the weather is very unpredictable, because you may watch the weather report. It will say Johannesburg, this. It gives you percentages. There's those technicalities. It gives you percentages. And it will say in North Riding, it's become closer and closer these days where you can see the location, but it still gives you percentages. And what does percentage mean? There's a possibility of it happening or not. And we often will hear that even in the same North Riding, it rained on this side, but no, not on my side. So we never really know exactly. And so we kind of will take our chances and hope that we are on the right side. What do we generally do? You're going to step outside and look and say, I don't think that is going to happen on this side. So therefore, I'm likely to give myself permission to undermine, undervalue, and diminish the possibility that it may turn out the way that it was predicted. And we sort of think, I'll be lucky. We give ourselves permission to think that way rather than to think of the opposite, because then we have to review our plans and we'd rather take the risk in the opposite.
I think even you touching on the fact that our weather patterns are changing so much with the climate change and just from extreme heat to your extreme cold, where people have lost their lives. Do you ever recall receiving a warning where you did change your plans with weather? Because I was trying to think for myself, even when I would see, okay, this is happening on this weekend, it might rain and I've got my son's birthday party outside and we don't have a rain plan. And then you're like, we're going to pray. And then we pray. And then there wasn't rain. And we're like, you see?
Yeah.
It all worked out.
God on our favor.
Right.
Right. Yeah. The God that favors some and not others. I think for me, I am winter phobic. I have been winter phobic all my life. So the weather does determine, the winter weather, let me put it that way. The winter weather does determine whether I do go to a funeral or not. And it is a price I am willing to pay. I know there's social frown.
I love how you say that.
I prepare myself. I know my mother is not going to approve, and I'm going to have a conversation with her about the fact that where were you? Why were you not there? It was cold. For me, it was cold.
That's reason enough.
It's reason enough.
And
exactly.
I think there's people that love winter.
I know. Aren't we just such a riot as human beings? And it's beautiful because for me, when we try to understand the strangeness, like hear people saying, oh, I love winter, but in winter you can dress up. But that's besides the point. The point is that it's still cold. People are miserable. You see people walking like robots. Everybody's on the move. I just can never make sense of that. And yet summer, all I need to do is to look outside and I smile. It gives me joy. It does, nothing else needs to happen. That is enough for me to be happy. And so we all, find our places in between that, and therefore the sorts of accommodations that we are willing to make in order to, get that fix of a day out, a place with, and so on, reconnecting with people and so on. And I think we put the social above the technical of the weather. And we've made plans with you, So how am I now going to tell Relebogile ukuthi, sorry, I'm not going to show up? Then what's going to happen to me? So I'm going to be the party pooper and so there's a whole stigma that's attached to it. There's a cultural frown to certain things. There's, backlash, there's judgment, there's criticism. There's people, and especially certain events more than others. There's a sense in which there's an ubuntu, to making the sacrifice, to be there in spite the adverse weather and other circumstances. People will be sniffling and fluish and be like, I'll just go there for a few minutes just to show head, just to show face, that people can see you and you mark the social register and you're approved as a decent member of society. And when you don't, there's all sorts of comments and whispers and judgments, and people would rather, risk the opposite than the social frown. Because I remember growing up, you would always hear that if you don't go to people's funerals, people don't go to your funeral. And
as if we're going to be there awake saying, why didn't you come?
As if the funeral will not proceed without you. Like it will go on, with or without you, it will go on. So yeah, I guess we are human beings. We are creatures of habit. We are socialized in certain ways. And it becomes very much harder for us to negotiate the external reality. We'd rather believe our own internal reality. And it's that confirmation bias in which we negotiate ourselves out of the lived reality and rather negotiate ourselves into our own subjective reality, because that's easier to live with perhaps, and we can always say, I thought it would be, but what am I going to do? We can kind of make sense of it in that way and forgive ourselves for the stupidity of not watching the weather or heeding the weather warnings that we have seen.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we continue. Any questions you may have for Dr. Khosi Jiyane around the psychology of severe weather warnings, 011 883 0702 and the WhatsApp line 072 702 1702.
Spend your afternoon
With Relebogile Mabotja
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.